Good evening, everyone. The time being 6:01 p.m, I will declare the September Ordinary Council meeting open. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Wadandi people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their culture, and to elders past and present, their descendants who are with us today and those who will follow in their footsteps. Recordance of attendance, apologies and leaves of absence. Councillor Terran-Troy has a leave of absence and is not here tonight, and Councillor Kitchen and Councillor Dillon are apologies. Response to previous public questions taken on notice, there is nil. Public question time. Mr. Hearn.
How's that?
That's good, thank you.
So do I refer to you as Mr. Acting President or Mr.
Acting President or Deputy Chair is fine, or Chair.
President?
However you feel, Mr. Hearn.
Boss, okay. Thank you. A very simple definition of a budget is a plan you write down about how you will spend your money and collect your revenue each month. Looking at the financials to July the 31st, and you'll find them on pages 630, I'm referring to, revenue budget collections are 91% or $1,989,735 short of the budget estimate, while expenditure, also page 6 of 30, $1,992,292 is $959,642 short or underspent on budget, on a budget estimate of nearly 2.9 million. Am I correct in assuming that the budget provision for July were calculated by just dividing the annual budget by 12 and putting that figure into the budget column?
Sorry, I'll pass that to the CEO.
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Hearn. The answer to that question is yes. Currently, using the Shire's general ledger structure and the budget has been dealt with in that linear fashion, and each month has been dealt with as 1/12. However, over the last 12 months, 18 months, we've had a complete review of our general ledger and our standard chart of accounts. Now that that structure is in place, going forward, our intention would be to reflect income and expenditure as we would expect it to occur, not in a 1/12 per month linear fashion.
So when can I expect to see that change?
I'll ask the Director.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Hearn. The CEO is correct. We are changing the internal way in terms of how we monitor our capital progress. And the report that will come to Council next month will be a visual representation in terms of how we feel our expenditure will be spent over the next or the remaining 11 periods.
Thank you. So the next part of my question, I guess, is fairly obvious given the response. If so, can the Shire show a bit more thought and science to actually work out, adjust and allocate a budget for the months the expenditure and revenue is likely to occur to be spent and collected? Asking this question, I'm aware that some items are budgeted for on an accrual basis, so obviously your answer to that question is next month, in October, when I see the August figures, you'll show realistic budget allocations. Okay, thank you. Also, just out of curiosity, as I said, I'm aware that some items are budgeted on an accrual basis. For example, your rates revenue, that is normally shown as a collection when the rates are sent out. Have you changed the way you've done that and shown it on a monthly basis now, or was that just a mistake this month?
The Director of Corporate and Finance, sorry.
That'll also change next month too.
That'll change next month.
Yes, yeah.
And just out of curiosity, I mean...
Questions through the
Oh,
chair, Mr. Hearn, sorry.
Sorry, Mr Acting President. I understand why you do that, but also if some sort of a note could be provided to the accounts on rates revenue showing when the revenue is likely to be collected, because all we will see is $17 million as collected when you show it on an accrual basis, and no one knows who's paying quarterly, annually, half-yearly or in 4 instalments. So you can take that one on notice because it wasn't on my list, but if you can show that in the accounts, it would certainly help me to understand how your revenue collections are tracking during the year.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hearn. I mean, we'll take that as a note, given that that will mostly be impacted by the capability of how the accounting processes are done and how the report is produced. Did you want to continue with your additional questions?
I will. I'll forget the next one because that's obvious you've answered that. Interest revenue. In the statement of financial activity, interest revenue is shown as a negative balance of 15,194. That's on page 6 of 30, against a budget of 96,976, which is a positive, obviously positive figure. Why is the figure shown as a negative balance in a revenue item? And why is note 4 on page 15 of 30 showing interest collections of 57,303, while the statement of activity is showing a negative balance of 15,194? So is that, does that clear that question?
Yes, yeah. So thank you, Mr. Hearn. So interest revenue is shown in the statement of financial activity as a negative balance, as it represents the reversal of interest accrued in the 2023-24 financial year. Year-end adjustments saw $89,866,000 interest income accrued to the 2023-24 financial year. The reversal was due in the July 24-25 period. Actual interest earned in July 2024 from maturing deposit interest was an amount of $73,606 and $1,066 from interest on rate debtors. $57,303 of the actual interest earned was allocated to reserves.
Right. Okay. That's very good. And just on that particular item, and again you can take this one on notice as well. Why did the Shire during the month invest $1,665,000 in a NAB 4-month term deposit for 3.54%? When they could have invested it with the WA Treasury Corporation on call at 4.05, and if you bothered to check, you could have got 5.16 at Macquarie Bank or 5.13 at ANZ for a similar term. Why would you invest money at 3.54 when you at least know you're getting 4.05 on call at the WA Treasury Corporation? So you can take that one on notice.
Yeah, we're happy for us to take that on notice. I think that was in your second question pack that was submitted today as well.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Next one, note 5 in the accounts, which I think is on page 16 of 30, relates to capital acquisitions, and it shows a variance for the month of $3,042,000. That is, you underspent your capital works, or you now call it capital acquisitions, by $3,042,000. A quick analysis indicates the variance should be approximately 1.442 million. That's in my opinion. Is what you've shown in your finances a system error, and can it be corrected?
Yes, so I can confirm that this is a formula error and will be corrected. So the variation should be 1.422, $1,422,040 as per the capital funding total variance.
So that'll be corrected in July. Yep. Okay, in August. Thank you. Next question: how can capital works, or capital acquisitions, as you now call it, budget be so wrong after 1 month? What capital acquisitions were not made that had been planned to occur in July 24, totaling 1.44? I think you said 1.442 million.
Yeah, $1,422,040. So just in relation to the capital acquisition, so profiling of the budget is not included in the July 2024 monthly financial report. So the profiling of the budget is not included in the July 2024 monthly financial report. to help better monitor the capital expenditure. The budget was adopted on the 31st of July 2024, and the actual capital expenditure was a small amount in the July 2024.
So what do you mean by profiling of the budget?
Well, can I refer that to the Director, if that's okay, for additional information?
Thank you for your question, Mr Hearn. Profiling the budget would be dividing it by 12, which we've done historically, but now obviously we want to do it more succinct in terms of what we think the expenditure planning will be over the remaining 11 periods.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, so that we don't have a again, note 5, capital works or capital acquisitions, page 17 and 30, Note 5 provides a summary of what you're going to spend in capital works during 24-25. Can you add an additional column or columns to that note, explaining to me and councillors, ratepayers, when you're going to actually spend that money? Because I mean, I've got no way of telling, and all I read is we're 3 million short, which has been corrected to 1.42 short, but we're still short. So can you add an extra column to the capital works budget in the note, in that particular note, explaining when the money is going to be incurred? I mean, you used to do it when the previous director was here, but it disappeared as soon as she left.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Hearn. I think I'll take that on note, and of course considering what is capable within...
But I actually asked a question in here, can you do it?
Yeah, so just taking into consideration what are the capabilities of the programming that we're using and the layout, and obviously the ability with the reporting. I think essentially, I don't know if that's been addressed with the director's comment around how the new formatting of the financial reports will be produced following next month. I might refer to the director, if that's okay, for additional comment.
Thank you for your question, Mr Hearn. That's exactly what you'll see in the statements for next month, is an itemised detail that would resemble the capital worksheets that come to council, and then obviously with the budget amount that's been allocated to them through the adopted budget, and then a representation in terms of how that particular project is tracking, when it's due to start, when it's going to procurement, and that type of detail.
So that additional information will be included from August.
That's right.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr Hearn.
So that was basically the last one, so that we don't have a repeat of deferred expenditure that has happened in each of the previous 2 financial years. Can an extra column be inserted? So you've answered that one. Okay, and my supplementary questions, which I was disappointed I didn't get an answer for, because I thought they were pretty straightforward questions in accordance with the guidelines, but be that as it may, I'm very happy to take them on notice. And the first one relates to interest revenue, which you've answered, so I'll get a detailed explanation for that. The second one highlights the fact that we had 3 term deposits totalling nearly 4 million maturing during July, all of which have been invested for at least 2 months. And I think you've answered that one by saying that the interest was accrued in 22-23, and some of it was brought to account in 24-25 and offset against something or other. So, but I'm sure I'll get a thorough explanation of that. And you've explained the next one, why on page 15 and 30, note for reserve accounts is 57,303 recorded as income when it is not shown in the interest revenue on page 6 and 30. So that'll be answered, as is the next one. And the other one, question 2, why does the Shire continue to hold in excess of $3.8 million, I repeat, $3.8 million at 0% interest rate in a Bendigo bank account when it only spent $1.435 million in July 24? Is it a result of poor budgeting? If not, what is the reason? Is the Shire aware that if the surplus of approximately $2.4 million of its Bendigo bank account could or should have been invested at call with the WA Treasury Corporation, it would have yielded an additional interest in July of $8,272. And then the final one is how much notice is the Shire required to give to the WATC to transfer its core funds from the WATC account to the 0% interest-bearing Bendigo Bank account? Because I assume the Shire pays its bills 7-day, 14-day, 28-day. So if you've got an at-call account, you should be able to transfer your money overnight. I mean, that's what I'm sure everyone in this room does. But no, we've got $3.8 million getting 0%, and it's costing your budget about $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
So they're the supplementary questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hearn. And yes, so we received your supplementary questions this morning, and I believe the staff wrote back to you to advise that we would take those on notice. So having been read into the council meeting, I will take, as you mentioned, some of those questions have been addressed in the previous questions, but we will take the part 2 on notice. Yep. Thank you, Mr. Hearn.
Sure, I'll leave that on.
Just leave that on for a moment. We've got some more questions. Mr. Bob Horsfall.
Good evening to all councillors and Mr McMile. As you're aware, I'm from 587 Brookdale Road in Boyanup. I recently attended a meeting at the State Arbitration Commission regarding an application to extract silica sand adjacent to my home. During the meeting, a spokesperson for the mining company doing the extraction announced, in the presence of a senior magistrate, that they would be tendering for the clearing and upgrade of Skippings Road, Boyanup, to allow sand trucks access to the extraction. He also stated that this tender would be done in conjunction with the Shire of Capel, using road funding, which they felt would not be a problem, as they would tender under the cost so they could be assured of winning the tender. Can Council advise why this company, which has a direct vested interest in the extraction, be allowed to use public funding for the benefit of themselves and one resident, when so many roads in Boyanup require urgent upgrades to bring them up to standard?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Horsfall. So I can say that upgrade requirements to skipping roads is a condition of the development approval that was approved by the Joint Development Assessment Panel, and that is the responsibility of the applicant to finance and complete those works. The Shire has no capital works or capital funds allocated to Skippings Road in the 2024-25 annual budget. Minor maintenance works will be conducted to existing drainage as part of the Shire's regular program across this summer.
That's not what he said.
Yeah, well, this is what I'm saying on behalf of the Shire. There is no capital funds allocated to work to be done to Skippings Road.
Thank you.
Mrs. Penny David.
Thank you, Acting President, councillors and Mr CEO. I also attended the same State Administrative Tribunal hearing held on the 9th of August between BCP Materials and the DAP Executive Director. And following that meeting, I emailed immediately to Mr McMahon and Council, asking the same questions that I'm going to ask tonight. And it's, I think it's about 6 weeks ago. I purchased a copy of the transcript of the hearing because I was wanted to make sure that I heard what was said properly. And so I will read an excerpt of that transcript. This was what was said by Mr Lewis for Element, who is a consultant for the applicant, which is BCP Materials. He says, there's various management plans that still need to be prepared, and they're all being submitted to the Shire for assessment and review, and that will go to a council meeting probably later this year, where the residents will also have an opportunity for a deputation to address council. So there's that avenue. The current matter and the reason why the matter has, the various directions hearings have been deferred, was particularly around condition 9 and the road upgrading for Skippings Road. The applicant and the Shire have reached a mutual understanding as to what's required for the road upgrade, and we're comfortable to work with the Shire on that. The Shire is coming out next year with a road upgrade program for Skippings Road, of which BCP Materials is tendering that project. So, yes, working collaboratively with the Shire and fixing that road prior to haulage has been positive. For that reason, our client is comfortable to withdraw the matter at the tribunal and not seek an amendment to it. In addition to this, I also made a Freedom of Information request to obtain the correspondence between the applicant and the Shire in regards to this matter and all matters about the EIL. That closed yesterday, and I received today a link which I haven't been able to access because the Shire thinks that I owe $30, which I don't. So presumably tomorrow that will be resolved. Any upgrade works to Skippings Road to accommodate the applicant's quarry trucks is at the cost of the applicant, as this forms part of the EIL approval. To clarify, the road must be 6.1 metres wide, and if the road width and resheet requires widening, extension, or improvement of drainage or ancillary items, including signage, relocation of services, removal of trees and vegetation, this all forms part of the work required to achieve this 6.1 metre width. The existing condition of Skippings Road has been documented and observed, and everyone knows what it is. So my question to the Shire, which I asked previously in my email to Mr McMile, was what road upgrade works are planned for Skippings Road?
Yes, so thank you, Mrs David, for the question. And again, so no capital roads upgrades are planned or budgeted by the Shire, with the only capital works being acquired by the proponent to complete as part of the road upgrade as per Condition 9 of their DA, which you have mentioned, Condition 9, prior to commencement of development, the condition of Skippings Road shall be upgraded to the satisfaction of the Shire of Capel. And the advice note that in relation to Condition 9, the upgrade of Skippings Road will require widening of pavement to 6.1 metres and a reseal of 100mm gravel. The Shire does not have any capital roads upgrades planned or budgeted for Skippings Road.
Okay, so that answers my next question, which says where in the budget are the planned upgrade works for Skippings Road that has been approved. I see in the last council meeting that there's $17,500 for drainage that's been carried forward because the contractors tender for it was too high. Is this drainage upgrade work or existing repair work?
No, so the drainage is part of the regular summer drainage maintenance. So the work is consistently undertaken year on year as per the Shire's normal maintenance works program. Funds for maintenance works is held in a consolidated maintenance budget. So it is maintenance.
No improvement?
Not that I believe. I understand it's just maintenance.
So where I ask what is the budget for Skippings Road and where is the budget coming from, there is no budget?
No, there is no capital budgets for Skippings Road.
And contrary to what Element have stated, my next question said, why are there upgrade works planned for Skippings Road? But you're saying there's none.
No. So there's no capital roads upgrades planned for Skippings Road, and I'll just remake the comment that they're obviously the comments of Mr Lewis, and
yes,
on behalf of the Shire, these are my comments on behalf of the council, that there's no capital roads upgrade planned for Skippings Road.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Public question time. Is there any questions from the floor?
I do have one question.
Oh,
That's
Mrs
right.
David, yes, of course, go for it.
It's not really a question, it's more, is council being made aware that there have been some changes to the WorkSafe regulations around mining of silica sand on the 1st of September?
Yes, Mr David, the council is very aware of those changes to the workers' safe. You can tell I'm aware because I've got some stuff written down about it. Council is aware of those changes and will make comment on that shortly as well.
And that obviously will be taken into account in preparation and approval of the dust management plan?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
I will make, yep. Thank you. Was there any other questions from the floor? No, I'll move on to applications of leave of absence. Is there any applications of leave of absence? No, there being none. Is there any declarations of interest? No. Notice of items to be discussed behind closed doors. There is one 20.1 a day library lease. Confirmation of minutes, ordinary meeting of Council the 28th of August 2024. Do I have a mover for those minutes? Councillor Ferguson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor McCleary. Councillor Ferguson, is there any discussion on those minutes? No? Councillor McCleary? Is there any discussion on those minutes, councillors? That being the case, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Announcements by the presiding person presiding without discussion. So just to advise council and members of the public that under section 5.34 of the Local Government Act, the Shire President is currently on leave, and so the Deputy has been acting as Shire President from September 9th until tomorrow, the 26th of September. I have one further announcement to make, and that is that after deliberation with staff and council, as the presiding member of this meeting, person of this meeting, I have decided to, we have withdrawn item 14.2 Skippings Road due to the recent introduction of legislative reform around silica dust and safety benchmarking for occupational health and safety regulations, and the implications that that may have on the proposal. Given the recency of these changes, the report and appurtenant documentation have not been scrutinised against the updated regulations, and as such we do not feel we can confidently recommend that staff do not feel that they can confidently recommend a decision be made tonight without understanding these changes in full details. Withdrawal of the item will allow council to continue working with Shire officers to relay concerns to the applicant and to have any further questions or unknowns answered in a suite of updated documents to address concerns of stakeholders before proceeding with a decision. Petitions, deputations and presentations, there are none. 11 motions of which previous notice have been given. There is one motion of previous notice of Councillor Mogg. I'll call for Councillor Mogg. You wish to move your motion. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Noonan. Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Chair. Yes, I brought forward this motion after working with many community groups with stakeholders, such as the Capel Road Safety Action Group, where stakeholders are involved, our staff, the community group members, politicians, main road representatives, and the effectiveness it has. And then also with Councillor Noonan's motion brought forward the formation of a committee working with the Economic Development Committee. Again, all stakeholders coming, and we meet. And it's a very effective way of getting everybody communicating on issues within the Shire and networking. And the environment topic, I feel, is one that's missing in our Shire. So I'd propose this motion to help get stakeholders within our Shire working together in a committee for those issues. Hopefully the likes of LCDC can come on board and other enthusiast people in our communities on the topic. So I wish and hope our fellow councillors have support with this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mogg. Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President, and thank you, Councillor Mogg, for bringing this motion to the table. I think it's a good idea. I think the previous committee that the council set up was the EDAC, the Economic Development Advisory Group. This is a similar sort of a thing in relation to matters of the environment. There are a number of
committees already in relation to the council, such as the Climate Change Adaptation Committee, and within that the Coastal Management Committee. So there will be, yes, there will be some overlap. However, the purpose of this committee is to bring in other groups, such as, the Ludlow Tuart Forest Restoration group, the Possum Training School, or Rehabilitation School, the LCDC, the newly formed Restoration of the 5 Mile Brook group that's just coming into fruition, and any other community-based groups such as whether they're community gardens or even groups like the Men's Shed may even be interested. The Capel Men's Shed may even be interested in having a representative on this group, and I think that would be good to have all of those people in a room to be able to discuss environmental issues and to know what else is happening in other spheres. So even though there will be a small degree of overlap, I think that this is a very useful vehicle to bring people together so that matters that concern the environment can be discussed, and so that we can collaboratively work together to hopefully achieve some better outcomes for the Shire. So thank you very much, Councillor Mogg, and I'm happy to support your motion.
Is there any other councillors who wish to speak on the item? Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Acting Presiding Officer, get it right. I'm not too sure who this so-called committee, and I'm supportive, but I'm not too sure who it's going to report to. Could I get clarification from staff, perhaps, as to who they believe this committee would report to?
It's difficult for me to go back to the mover and ask questions in this format, but given that it's it would be a committee formed by council, it would report to council.
Direct to council?
Yeah, it would
Not
be.
by a committee?
Sorry? Well, it would be that would be detailed in the terms of reference. I'll ask the CEO to make further comment.
Thank you, Chair. If council support the motion put by Councillor Mogg, then and a draft terms of reference. So committees of council, as the Chair mentioned, they do report directly to council, as you would know, and we've got 4 or 5 of those. What Councillor Mogg is proposing is a working group. So if this is supported by council and officers are then asked to and given the opportunity to develop a draft terms of reference that would then come back to council, it would give us an opportunity to consider where that structurally best sits. Now, off the top of my head, as a suggestion, it might sit well as a subcommittee of the Climate Change and Adaptation Committee, which is a committee of council. So, and without preempting that outcome, it would give us an opportunity to consider what representatives, both council-wise and community-wise, would sit on the group, and structurally how that would sit, and what the mechanism would be that anything that came out of that working group could be considered by council. But I wouldn't expect that it would be direct. It would likely be through an existing committee of council.
Councillor Ferguson. Yep. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr Chair. A couple of questions on this. Do we know what the dollars were for setting up the CharMap working group?
And Councillor McCleary, you're testing me because I can't. I will put that question to the CEO. That's right.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, Councillor McCleary, you're talking about the Coastal Subcommittee. Well, it hasn't cost us much yet because it hasn't met. Really, all we've really done is go through a community advertising process for nominated community representatives. So I wouldn't think any more than maybe a few $100. But obviously, once the committees start to meet, then there'll be an administrative responsibility that the Shire would undertake through agendas and minutes and reports that ultimately would come back through the Climate Change Committee.
Councillor McCleary, did you have anything additional?
Yeah, I still have the floor. Look, I'm going to make an amendment to the motion, and that is to have this working group come under the Climate Change Action Committee.
Second that.
And Councillor Ferguson has seconded that. All right, the amendment, we'll just finalise the amendment on the screen. Councillor McCleary, how did you want that amendment incorporated into the original motion?
Item 4, yeah.
Item 4, and what would you like item 4 to say, if you wouldn't mind giving us some wording?
That the working group reports back to the Climate Change and Adaptation Committee. Or as it resides under, I suppose.
No, because it's the intention changes. So, Councillor McCleary, are you happy with the amendment being to add point 4, the terms of reference to reflect that the working group report to the Climate Change Adaptation and Sustainability Committee?
Yep.
You're comfortable with that? So that amendment is on the table. It's been moved by Councillor McCleary, seconded by Councillor Ferguson. Councillor McCleary, you've got the floor on your amendment.
Okay, thanks for that. Look, my reasoning for this is we've got the Climate Change and Adaptation Committee working on all environmental climates and stuff like that, and I think this sits within that committee and reports back to that, and it's already got some another working group that deals with the charm map, and it should work quite nicely and a neat fit in that situation. The question that I do have before this goes on a bit further is I heard a whole lot of groups rattled off, and it's my understanding that the Shire staff already communicate with all of those groups and liaise with them. So it might be a simple fact of bringing them back into that working group and coming to that climate committee, which I think is a better fit than just coming straight back to council.
Was there a question in that, or are you concluding your...
Well,
there
is a question in that. Yeah, there is a question in that. I believe that the staff already communicate with a number of the groups that were listed. And I'm just wondering why.
I'll rephrase that for the CEO, if the CEO wouldn't mind elaborating on what the current communication strategy is with those community groups that were mentioned.
Through you, Chair, you're right, Councillor McCleary. Shire staff do work with, communicate with, and support probably each of those groups that Councillor Mogg mentioned in her moving the motion, some more, some less. In considering draft terms of reference, it would provide officers the opportunity to consider whether or not there's the way to do that more effectively through this working group, and if that's the case, then also what communication or work would continue outside of the group as well. So it would give us a chance to have a fresh look.
Councillor McCleary, have you concluded?
I'm still going.
Are you still going? You still got the floor?
Look, thanks for that. That sort of gives me a bit more satisfaction that something's happening in the background. And yeah, look, I think it'd be great in the terms of reference and how that communication will work with those groups. I'm just a bit concerned in the terms of reference, we need to reflect the size of that group. Otherwise, it'll become unwielding with heaps of people. I've broken that now. My animation, I'll fix that up later. It's all right, I'm sure. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, look, there's. I just think a working group that would finish up being dozens of people's is way too too big and unwielding, and we've already heard from the CEO that they already communicate with a lot of those groups anyway, so a bit of community representation. The other concern I have, once we set up this working group, does it short-circuit anybody from the community making a comment on environmental sense, and I wouldn't want to see that as well. So yeah, look, I think it'll, as I said, my amendment will sit nicely in what we've already got set up.
Thank you, Councillor McCleary. Councillor Ferguson is the seconder of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr Acting Shire President. Look, I just want to thank Councillor McCleary for actually bringing to the fore in words what my anxiety was when I asked the question earlier, and that is the clear terms of reporting, which I think is important for something like this. I think it's a totally commendable initiative from Councillor Mogg and Councillor Noonan, but I'm now much more satisfied if this is adopted, supported by Council, that its reporting mechanisms are clearly defined. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Is anyone else who wishes to speak on the amendment? No, there's no more speakers on the amendment. Councillor McCleary, nothing to add in closing?
Yeah, I do, thanks, Chair. I did have a quick look at the setup that the City of Bunbury had, and theirs works under the same committee that we have, or a similar committee that we have. So I think that'll be the better avenue for it.
All right, thank you. I'll put the amendment to the vote. So the amendment is to add point 4 that reads as follow: the draft terms of reference to reflect that the working group report to the Climate Change Adaptation and Sustainability Committee. I'll put that amendment to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously and becomes a substantive motion. Was there anyone else who wished to speak on the substantive motion? I'll just make some small comments. I think I still have some concerns around the role of the group. I think it's very broad. I think it's somewhat of an environmental catch-all. I think the improvement made through the amendment is commendable. I think this does belong under the Climate Change Adaptation and Sustainability Committee, which I've been a member of for some nearly 6 years, and Councillor Mogg as well has been there and obviously has brought this motion to Council. I've also seen these groups go really wrong as well. So the Shire of Augusta Margaret River had a group similar to this, and they were producing material in that group and trying to get it through to Council that created some very restrictive policies around agricultural land uses. It caused major damage to the local government. Major damage to the local government. In fact, I had a number of meetings with farmers in Scott River about the policy that this group had drafted to try and explain to them, no, it's not a policy of Council. It's actually just a project of someone on the committee, and that is one of the risks you have with a very broad working group, which I'm still not completely clear on what its role is and how its role differentiates from the Climate Change Adaptation and Sustainability Committee that has been developing and managing the strategy around those particular issues, and of course the CHRMAP and the subcommittee around the CHRMAP as well. I mean, these sort of catch-all committees, we could go absolutely crazy with these. There's many large groups of organisations and stakeholders around the Shire that could benefit from a catch-all group that essentially gives them a better pathway and access to, things like the committee. So perhaps, and it is difficult in this format because it's we can't, ask questions so much of the mover and whatnot, but perhaps in in closing, Councillor Mogg may like to try and address some of the questions that have been raised by councillors around what the functions will be and what its role will be, and the strategy around this as well, which is also beneficial for the staff who are obviously taking notes around what when they bring the terms of reference to council, what it is, the vision that Councillor Mogg had from the motion. But yeah, I do have some concerns about the broad nature of it, and I do have some concerns about the impact and damage that these groups have done to some groups of the community, particularly those in Scott River and the challenges that they've created there. So is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? In that case, I'll give it back to Councillor Mogg to close debate.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Chair. I'd just like to thank Councillor McCleary for bringing the amendment to the motion, and thank you for raising exactly another aspect of why I brought the motion. Is the City of Bunbury have formed this group and under an umbrella of their environment committee, and I have spoken to residents who sit on this environment committee in the City of Bunbury, and they tell me how they're pleased with the way it's operated. They have a voice, they're valued, and an input, and just connect relationships with stakeholders, staff, residents, etc., and council. But also, I'm interested to see the term of reference comes back to council, what Shire staff bring. So thank you.
Councillors, debate being closed, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That is 4, and against? That is 2. Sorry, I'm just ticking all the boxes to make sure I've got everyone's votes recorded. That item is carried. Questions of which previous notice have been given, there is none. Item 13.1, Chief Executive Officer Reports, RFT 2110, Integrated Growth Framework Plan, Appointment of Lead Consultant. Do I have a mover for that item? I have a mover for that item. Councillor Ferguson. Do I have a seconder? Councillor McCleary. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Presiding Officer. I move this motion in open council, but I also express my reservations about this matter not having gone to confidential consideration, so we could actually dig a bit deeper into it. But I'm happy to recommend it because it's an essential part of what we need to do, and I will not impede the process of this particular issue with my broader concerns at this time. Thank you.
Councillor McCleary, would you like to have anything to add?
Thank you, Chair. There's listed a whole lot of things in here. This kind of sits in with environmental issues, and it was one of the things I was going to raise in the previous item, that I'd like to see this finished before we jump into doing other things in the environmental thing that talks about in the sustainability implications. The IGF will provide guidance to the Shire officers in developing sustainable practices and identifying specific environmental outcomes. So it's overlapping into the previous item that was brought to council. And I'd almost like to have seen this completed before we moved into that working group. That the other thing that I have is that it also sits in the Economic Development Committee as well, and providing some guidance in there. So I imagine when we get this back, we'll see a few things that can develop across a few committees with us. So look, I think this is a good thing. It's I believe it was covered by a grant or in that sense, but yeah, look, I'm quite happy with this motion.
Is there any other councillors who wish to speak on the item? I'd just like to add, we've been through the place plan process, and many remember when that process was underway and we endorsed the place plan, which we sent back and we did quite a bit of work on before council was happy with that place plan. A large component of that was developing these town site strategies, which are one of the things that the community was really focused on, because there's been these town site strategies that were left on the shelf for many, many decades, out of date, and they essentially, part of the place plan or the commitment from council at the time was that the new town site strategies will come as part of that integrated growth plan framework plan. So I think this is really an essential step in that place plan process. And then again, as Councillor McCleary's stated, the entire amount has been funded through a federal grant, the Housing Support Program grant, which was $500,000. So there's also additional funds in there for engagement with traditional owners and town planning consultancies for dwelling deeper into those town site strategies. So I'm very happy with the item, very glad to see this is us following up on what we've developed or worked on with the place plan, and you think you endorse those fantastic glossy looking documents, be it that there was a lot of work that needed to go into actually getting that to a state where council was happy, and they don't just go on the shelf, they roll out through these, we've got the next step in the integrated growth plan and the town site strategy. So very happy to support the item. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Acting President. It's more a question, I suppose. I'm supportive of the plan going ahead. However, just in the information that we've got, the scope there, it talks about the IGFP will encompass 5 town sites: Capel, Boynup, Jalorup, Pepper Grove Beach, Dalyellup, and 2 areas, Stratham and Elgin. Then in the diagram that's there, underneath diagram 1, it's got Dalyellup, Boynup, Capel, Jalorup, Pepper Grove Beach and Stratham, but then it's, instead of Elgin, Stratham, Elgin Rural, it's got Stratham separately and then Boynup North Inland. So Boynup, so my concern is that Elgin and the Plains, and Gwynnup, that they get covered as well. That it does cover the whole of the Shire. That it's not something that one section of the Shire is going to be missed out on.
Yeah. So it's 5 elements of the integrated growth plan, not 5 distinct communities. And yes, you're right. In the diagram, it refers to Peppermint Grove, Stratham, and Boynup North Inland. And from memory, that is actually the same terminology and mapping that was used in the place plan. So there was a map in the place plan that essentially had every area covered. Perhaps the up for discussion is Elgin is in the Boynup North Inland map area. But for a bit of a visual cue of what those areas are, that was in the place plan. Was there anything else, Councillor Noonan? Councillor, is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item, or I will give it back to the mover to close? Councillor Ferguson.
Look, thank you, Mr. Acting Shire President. I'm pleased to support this motion as it develops a long-term strategy for the council, and that's my mission in life, and I look forward to supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 13.2, Wolga election advocacy. Do I have a mover for that item? Councillor Ferguson. Moving it amended, and we'll just get that amendment.
Okay, the amendment is that in item, in the office recommendation, the item 3, that voting methods, council supports advocacy position A. I'd like to say that council supports advocacy position B.
Yep.
Which is,
So so that's the amendment.
as part of it.
Yeah, are you making an additional amendment?
Yes, and in item 4, internal elections, that council supports advocacy position A. I'd like to move that we support advocacy position B, which is optional preferential. And in item 5, I'd like to move that voting accessibility, that council supports advocacy position A and B, but not C. If we're going to have voluntary voting, I'll just the argument in a minute.
Yeah,
but
sorry,
not
I'll
C.
just get the amendment on the floor,
Yep.
or I'll get the amended item on the floor, and then I'll let you have the floor as the mover.
Thank you.
Is there a seconder for that item? Noting that it's moved amended. Councillor Noonan. Yep. All right, Councillor Ferguson, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Shire President. Look, these are good recommendations in broad. Oh, sorry, yes, I'm open. These are good recommendations in broad, but the voting methods that council supports advocacy position B for optional preferential, well, half the council's here because of optional preferential, and I think that gives a better reflection of the community's sentiment in the broad sense rather than first past the post. That's actually a very it's a very brutal way of determining elections, and as we can see from, and I use an example of the general elections in the UK, which are first past the post, you can change from, you know, having a majority of 300 votes to being voted out of office by 500 elected members. So it's actually, I think, bad for the general community outcomes in terms of elections. I know there's expressed concerns about it creates the capacity for political alliances or what have you. Well, we live in a big world, we can cope with that. So I actually think that that's a much preferable method. Internal elections, well, I'm just surprised that we've continued to support option A when we already had a conversation about the fact that if you get a tied vote in terms of positions on council, then they end up being drawn out of a hat. Whereas if we have optional preferential, the likelihood of a tied vote is most unlikely. And I think that's a much better way to determine council positions on outcomes. The voting accessibility, well, I don't see any point in council supporting the establishment of voting booths unless we have mandatory voting, compulsory voting. If we've got voluntary voting, we've got an adequate system of dealing with that. Now, I'm not saying I necessarily support voluntary voting, but as long as that's the method, then using either the capacity to postal vote or drop your envelope into a council slot, I think is entirely appropriate with that methodology. You've got 30% maximum voter turnout with optional voting, and to then have to turn around and have positions staffed, set up, and voting booths around the Shire in the situation of having that option available to the electorate, I think is nonsensical personally. So I actually like to recommend that motion, and I thank Councillor Noonan for his support, at least in seconding it.
Councillor Noonan as a seconder. Do you wish to have anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President, and I'd like to thank Councillor Ferguson for moving this motion as he has moved it in the amended fashion. I agree with him absolutely. I think that optional preferential voting is a better method of gaining a more accurate indication of the voting public's intention. I do appreciate that some councillors may be concerned about the possibility of factions or the politicisation of council positions, but that can happen under under any voting method. That can happen under first past the post as well. I don't think that the negatives of first past the post outweigh the advantages of optional preferential in terms of gaining a good indication of what the general public like, but also what they don't like. That's the benefit of optional preferential. One of the benefits. I agree with them as well on voting accessibility. That we should drop position C, which was for the in-person voting. It's not just in theory, not just the day, let's say it's a Saturday. Councillor Ferguson is absolutely right that if it's not compulsory, there's very little point to it. If you have in-person voting, so then you'll have to have booths open for at least the whole, the standard sort of day from whatever it is, 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock through till 6 o'clock, and then the counting and all of that sort of stuff. So staffing, but also it would suggest that you would have to have booths, or possibility of having booths open for a 2-week period prior, which would be, I think that's a very large cost impost for a marginal benefit or gain. I'd encourage Walga and the state government to, if they really want to look at reforming things, and if they really want to get serious about having a more representation or better representation in local government elections, then, and they do want to make it compulsory, then to combine local government elections with state government elections. So it's compulsory, you've got to go there. You get 3 different papers, okay, your legislative council, legislative assembly, and your local government papers. And I think that might encourage residents to become more engaged in their local government. I'd be quite happy to see that as a reform, but that's a major reform and something that the state would have to look at. But I certainly support Councillor Ferguson and thank him for bringing this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Noonan. I just want to add to the item. So I think it's spot on about the voter accessibility and removing in-person voting in C, because as it currently stands, if you get your postal vote, you get it delivered to home. If you don't want to pop it in the mail, or you've missed the deadline, or you're worried about it being too close to election day, during office hours you can drop into the Shire and you can drop your ballot paper off. Essentially in person, you just don't go into the booth. And again, if there's an issue with your ballot paper or you need a new ballot paper, you can actually come in, and usually there's a returning officer here during certain times, and you can collect another ballot paper and you can drop it in the box. So it's very timely, because New South Wales local government elections have just occurred weekend before last. Had a little bit of involvement with a close friend who is currently sitting on 0.9 of a quota. It's been nearly 2 weeks, and they haven't finished counting. Now, admittedly, she's got 75,000 electors in her local government. Only 50,000 of them decided to show up, and 20% of the total votes are informal. So even with compulsory voting, they're not getting much more than 40% turnout between the informal votes and whatnot. So if that's not a very good argument for why voluntary voting seems to work in local government and won't make a huge impact, that's good. Very happy with the changes to 5, very happy with the changes to 4, and as Bean's addressed, essentially, because of the way what it says in the Act, if we had 3 ties for the election of president or deputy, we would pull the president or deputy out of a hat. which I think is a terrible outcome. And when you're electing one position, having no preferences for that is all right. I'm not happy with 3. I'm not happy with preferential voting as the key voting method for the election of councillors for a couple of reasons, and it's already been alluded to, but preferences open the way to preference deals, and preference deals open the way to tickets, and tickets open the way to quasi-political party or political groups being involved in local government. Now, yes, there are people in the room who benefited greatly from from that system, preferential voting system, and there are winners and losers from both systems. I feel like a bit of a loser from that system, because Councillor Sharp and I got 1.7 quota, Councillor Sharp got 1.4. Unlike the state election system for the upper house, where you eliminate from the bottom and preferences flow from people who are eliminated, we had our votes sliced straight off at 1, and then suddenly the system is not appropriate when you've got a state government that's just reformed the upper house to try and remove that process, and then brings that process in as a way to deal with local government. It works when you have groups. So in the eastern states or in New South Wales, you run as groups, and you also run as an endorsed candidate with a political party. They're too far gone. I hope we never get there. But if you get 1.7 quota, then the person next on your ticket grabs your 0.7, and then you start going upwards like you do with the state election. It is not a suitable method for I think at the moment in local government. It also costs more. Our bill for this time around was significantly larger than any previous election. The election took days to call. The WAEC clearly is not capable of managing preferential voting or the preferential voting system, because we were still here at 10 o'clock at night, and as much as we knew, where things were going, there were all these weird rules around calling the election and not calling the election. The reason the election was not called on the night was because someone was taking too long to respond at the head office in Perth, because they could not handle this type of election. So I'm just going to amend the item. I'm going to move an amendment to swap 0.3 from B to A. Otherwise, happy with all the other changes. No, I'm going to amend it because this is not an amendment. This is the amended motion. So this is the current motion. So Councillor Ferguson moved the motion amended. So I'm amending the motion that's on the floor. So I'm moving the amendment to amend 0.3 to say position B. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor McCleary. I don't think I need to add anything more to that. I think they are two rather different voting methods, and I think there's winners and losers in both systems. But my key priority is ensuring that we don't go down the path of ending up like New South Wales, which is a big concern to me. As much as I love the fun of the campaign, and I'm very proud of my friends in New South Wales, and even the second youngest ever elected councillor in New South Wales, Logan, who him and I caught up for a coffee a couple of months ago, and we figured out that because it takes so long for them to declare votes, that he was actually a couple days older than me once they finally declared that he was elected. So just keeping the mantle on that front, but that was the New South Wales Electoral Commission's fault, that one. But yeah, otherwise I'm happy with that. Is Councillor McCleary seconded that amendment?
Thank you, Councillor Shano and Chair. Look, totally agree with your comments about 0.3. One of the things that's not mentioned, it's kind of a quasi-optional preferential. You either vote for one person or you vote through the numbers, and I think that kind of, if it's preferential voting, it's preferential voting if you go down that path, and so it's not much different from the first past the post, and I think first past the post is quite a bit cleaner. And as pointed out, the cost of the election went up, the timing of the election went up. I don't think it's a good outcome, and I like this amendment, and I think we should be voting for that.
Any other councillors wish to speak on the item? Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Shire President. Look, I can't support that amendment because I think my views have been made quite clear that I think optional preferential gives a better balanced outcome. And I'm reasonably familiar with the process in New South Wales, having been the beneficiary of, getting elected to council both on primary and preferential votes. And my experience has been, notwithstanding the fact that you had whatever local government area you're referring to, had such an appalling turnout. The other issue is that, going back to the compulsory voting issue, is that you then also introduce the fact you have pre-poll, which is astonishingly expensive because you've got to have several nominated locations particularly in a regional area where you've got a geographical spread where the have to be manned and not only manned by staff at a great expense.
Councillor, I'll just remind you, we're just discussing the amendment
to
point 3, but you will, as the original mover, you will get a chance to close.
I'm adding a bit of brief background to it. And so the issue of preferential voting, I concur with the clearly expressed views that Councillor Noonan has put forward, is that they give a better expression of the sentiment of the community. If there's a risk in terms of the potential forming of political alliances, well, so what? We live in the real world, and we shouldn't insulate ourselves from that if that's particularly what evolves. I don't see any sense of that in Shire of Capel, fortunately, so I'm not necessarily saying I support that outcome, but nonetheless I think we needn't be afraid of that if we think that optional preferential gives us a better overall community outcome and representation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on the amendment? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. My concern with having first past the post is that it's very easy to end up with a very polarising candidate. So someone who gets the highest number of votes, let's say you've got 10 candidates and one person gets 15% of the vote. And that might just be the largest percentage of votes, and they get the position. The French have a very interesting system. It's called a reverse optional preferential system, where they don't vote for the person that they want to get the position. They vote for the people that they vote out the people that they don't want to get the position. So you end up getting rid of the people who are the most polarising. Under this system, System C, where that person who had 15% of the vote out of 10 candidates, they might have, under the French system of reverse preferential, they might have had 80% of the population voting against them, saying that's the very last person that you want to see, because they know that particular person has a set agenda, and it might be to go in and wreak all sorts of mayhem and carnage or whatever, and people get elected with those sorts of agendas. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the political reality, not just in other countries, but unfortunately, we see elements of that here as well. So the optional preferential system, I think, is a far better system because it has the tendency of bringing the person elected back to the centre. It's back to the person the people who are most appealing, most reasonable, most acceptable for most people, and I think that's the advantage. They're most representative of the most people, and I think that's the the advantage of the system. So I take on board certainly the concerns that you've got, but you might remember, I don't think you were in my Year 9 politics and law class. So there's some interesting exercises that you can do. So I'd commend the original motion, and so I'm going to be voting against this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Noonan. I was in Mrs Doyle's Year 9 politics and law class. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the amendment? You've got a question, Councillor McCleary?
When we're voting for the amendment that's sitting on the table at the moment, that means if there's 4 candidates, you get to vote for 4 candidates. If we go into optional preferential, then you only really get to vote for 1 candidate in a sliding scale. Is that right?
That's very close to an additional statement. But yes, as under the first past the post system previously, you voted for the number of candidates that there was vacancies. So if there was 4 vacancies, you ticked 4 boxes. Under the optional preferential system, you either vote 1 for the candidate that you wish to have elected, or you can number the rest preferentially. You can just vote 1, or you can preference all of them, which is why it's optional preferential, not preferential. Yep. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the amendment? That being the case, I'll just close debate. I think both arguments for both are very strong. Haven't changed my mind, but I'll put the amendment. So this is the amendment to change point 3, voting methods and council support advocacy position A, which is the first past. It supports the position of first past the post. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? There's 3. All those against? No. Thank you. We got those. So, being the presiding member, that means I now get the casting vote. For new councillors will know that my rule is that I will never use the casting vote to ensure that an item passes council, and so the casting vote is in the negative and the amendment is lost. So we will go back to the substantive motion. I've lost track of who was speaking, but I think I had just spoken. Was there anyone else who wishes to speak on the original motion? No. In that case, I'll give it back to Councillor Ferguson as the mover to close.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Shire President. I'll put the motion.
All those against? That is carried. That was just McCleary and Mogg against. Yeah. Item 14.1, Asset Management Policy Review. Do I have a mover? Councillor McCleary, was your hand dashing up? It went up. Councillor McCleary's moved that. Is there a seconder? Councillor Ferguson. Councillor McCleary, do you wish to say anything on the item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, President. All right, look, this asset policy covers a lot of realms in the scheme of things, and there's a couple of items in there. And one in particular, which involves us as councillors, is when we make decisions, ensures that the full impact of a council's decision on existing and new assets is thoroughly understood and considered in a planning process. That's the other thing. Now, assets are liabilities. Once we commit to one, we've then got a long life liability or a short life liability, depending on the type of asset. So that's the kind of things that we've got to watch out in decision making. We affect budgets. So it's good to have a policy where we head down this path. we need to define between what is a need and what is a want. A lot of times we see wants come up and they're not really necessary in the sense of things, and that's the kind of clarity in an asset management and policy thing. We need to really get to that, and I know there's a strategic document coming out after this, so following up on the policy. Look, they're things that I'll say on asset management, and that's basically it. I'll re-emphasise it's assets are in fact a liability, and an asset manager clearly differentiate between wants and needs.
Thank you, Councillor McCleary. Councillor Ferguson, did you have anything to add as a seconder?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Shire President. Look, it's a very comprehensive policy document, and quite frankly, it's difficult to wrap your head around all the minute details that's buried in there. But nonetheless, it gives us a framework in which we can deal with these issues, and I commend Councillor McCleary's comments that enables us to perhaps more readily distinguish between needs and wants, but also just manage our assets carefully and be thoughtful and considerate when we actually approve the development of assets. The long-term obligations that arise from them, it's all right to say, well, we'd like to put a hand in the air to support the building of that particular facility as a council asset, but of course the consequences of maintaining it for the next 20 to 40 years, of course, a consideration that we've got to take into account as well. So I commend the policy and gives us a working framework into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Is anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? In that case, Councillor McCleary, you're happy to close?
Thank you, Deputy President. Look, most of it's been said. Again, emphasise needs and wants. The financial implications of our decisions on assets are an important process, and that's all covered in this policy. I'll put the motion to the vote.
I'll put item 14.1 to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 14.2 has been withdrawn. For the benefit of the minutes, I will just reiterate the statement made earlier. So item 14.2 has been withdrawn due to the recent introduction of legislative reform around silica dust and safety benchmarking for occupational health and safety regulations and the implications that may have on the proposal. Given the recency of these changes and the report appurtenance documents have been the documentation has not been scrutinised against the updated regulations, and as such, Council and staff do not feel that we can confidently make a decision tonight without understanding these changes in further detail. Withdrawal of the item will allow Council to continue working with Shire officers to relay concerns to the applicant and have any further questions or unknowns answered in a suite of updated documents to address concerns of all stakeholders before proceeding with a decision. Item 14.3, retrospective approval rear boundary fence. Do I have a mover for that item? Councillor McCleary. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mogg. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Deputy President, and thank you, Councillor Mogg. I took a detour on the way here today and drove past this fence, and it's very hard to distinguish the difference in height from the neighbouring fence. It's down a laneway, and it's I think it's an insignificant impact in the local area. So, as earlier I was talking about, the heights of carport roofs are a lot higher than the 2.1, and they're only about half a metre off the road, or the laneway anyway, so it's at the rear of the house and not at the front.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mogg as a seconder. Did you wish to speak? You all right? I think I'll just add, just to reiterate the point that Councillor McCleary's made. This is a rear fence in an alleyway. It's really, from an amenity perspective and a visual perspective, the only people that would possibly see it is everyone else who's accessing their garage. And as Councillor McCleary said, it's actually quite difficult to notice the height difference. And I think even along the adjoining fence to the neighbour is actually the correct height, and it's actually just the components that connect to their garage and their rear fence that are 2.1 metres. So I've absolutely no issue with supporting the officer's recommendation. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? Councillor Ferguson.
It's a question through you, Mr Deputy Chair. I'm not sure which staff member, but how did the applicant probably only find themselves in this position, but they had to make a retrospective application? Because I actually think it's a bit naughty to actually go ahead and build a fence when you haven't got approval.
Thank you, Councillor. I understand that it was approved, but it's a variation from the approval. However, I will refer that question to the Acting Director of Infrastructure and Development.
Thanks, Chair. You'd be correct in saying, but it wasn't there was an original approval issued. There was a misunderstanding, and as such, there was a 2.1 metre high fence erected. It came to, I suppose, a concern raised by a community member. Not necessarily an objection, but more so a comment made, and was investigated by Shire officers. The reason it's obviously being presented to Council today is that we don't necessarily, as Shire officers, have delegation to determine a fence which is contrary to the local law.
Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Director. Councillor Ferguson, you all right?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. You might just want to pop your microphone off. Is there any other councillors who wish to speak on the item? Seconder didn't want their right to speak? No? Oh, Councillor Noonan.
Just to ask a question, whether by approving this, if we were to vote for this, are we sort of signalling or potentially opening the floodgates for a whole series of accidental rear fences being built or adjusted?
I think to reiterate what the Acting Director has mentioned, there's no delegated authority to the organisation to be able to manage these non-compliances or variations in the height of the fence. So they would have to come to Council, and they should be addressed in their own merit each time they come to Council. I hope that there's no conspiracy going on in Dale-up fences, and that this will be on the rise and that the fence mafia will be out. But I think to answer that question simply, without that delegated authority existing, these items will have to come to Council, and they will need to be considered on their individual merit. Further question?
Another question, if I may. If it were to become apparent that, as Councillor Ferguson alluded, that a resident had been somewhat naughty or remiss in their application, are there any penalties that apply beyond not just having an order to remove the fence, but a financial penalty that that might be imposed? Do we have that capacity?
So to answer before I pass over, if there's an issue of non-compliance, the Shire does have the ability to provide a notice to rectify the issue, but I will ask the Acting Director of Infrastructure and Development to address your question regarding penalties.
Thank you, Chair. Given it is a dividing fence, there's no requirement to go through a development application process, so essentially there wouldn't be a penalty under 214 of the Planning and Development Act, but nonetheless I do believe there is a minor penalty that could be associated with a breach of the local law. I'm happy to take that on notice and provide some information throughout the week.
Councillor Noonan, did you have anything else? You're happy? Is there any other councillors who wish to speak on the item? No, I will give it back to Councillor McCleary to close discussion. Councillor McCleary has... okay, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 14.4, Local Planning Policy. Councillor Ferguson's hand straight up. Local Planning Policy 6.21, sea containers. Councillor Ferguson has moved that. Councillor Mogg has seconded that item. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Shire President. Look, I'm supportive of the motion as it's printed, except for the fact that we don't actually clarify what a container size is. Now, we did discuss it at the briefing session, but having had some experience with importing goods in containers, you've got standard 20 footers, you've got 40 footers, and you have what's called a high cube 40, which is a higher height, goes from 2.4 to 2.7. So when we say container, what are we actually referring to? Because there's a bit of an elastic band there. And should we amend the motion to clarify that particular aspect of the motion?
Well, Councillor Ferguson, you asked quite a few questions in your contribution.
Elaboration. The question is, should we actually modify the motion? No.
So,
do the council staff recommend we modify the motion to ensure we specify the container size?
so it's not appropriate for me to let council staff make comment on what council should or shouldn't do in regards to the motion. If you have a question about the policy, I can put that through to the acting director. I'm reluctant to ask them if they think we should change the recommendation. If you want to change the recommendation, you are welcome to. You move an amendment. This is also for advertising, so this will come back for final adoption.
Thank you. Then the question I would ask specifically of the staff is, what container size do they intend to be covered by this particular regulation?
So I'm happy to ask the Acting Director of Infrastructure and Development if he could elaborate on the catchment and the definition of sea container within the policy.
Thanks, Chair. The intention of the Shire officers would be to consider the definition of a sea container as the minimum standard in terms of definition. I don't have specific dimensions at hand at present, but definitely, obviously, through the advertisement process, there is an ability to amend the local planning policy, and as such, we do believe that it would be an acceptable and appropriate step to obviously clarify dimension sizes as part of the sea containers definition. So, in summary, we would obviously consider the smallest size possible to be the standard, if we are obviously talking about a particular number component to limitations.
What does that mean?
Had you? Yeah, I'm going to ask the Chief Executive Officer. I'm going to ask the Chief Executive Officer to answer that question.
Through you, Chair. So just adding to what the Acting Director said, you will notice in the draft policy proposed for advertising that it's looks at different lot sizes. One is residential size blocks, blocks around 2,000 square metres and up to 3 hectares and below and then above. So it could very well be through the advertising process and the comment process from the community that different size sea containers are appropriate for different size blocks. So that's a consideration which we would expect to come out of the advertising process.
Councillor Ferguson, did you have anything else you wish to add while you had the floor? Councillor Mogg, you were the seconder. Did you have anything else to add? Is there anyone who wishes to speak on the item? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Deputy President. Yeah, look, I appreciate the CEO and the Director of his comments on this. Look, it was brought up in the thing, and I totally see that if you had a big block, then a larger sea container is going to work. A smaller block, a smaller container is going to work. And if we look at some of our planning policies, a 3x3 shed doesn't need planning approval. It can be put up, so there's already that kind of size that you're looking at in the backyard. I think this motion is just going to put about to the advertising. I think there's going to need to be some clarity in size and block arrangements at that point. I don't think it's worth an amendment at this stage. I'd like to see the comments come back, and I'll probably write a comment in myself.
Thank you, Councillor McCleary. Is there anyone else who? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Acting President. I agree with Councillor McCleary, and I think that colour will obviously also be another factor that people will have some, comment to make on. And the more invisible sea containers are, I think the more socially acceptable they tend to be. So no doubt that'll come out as well.
Thank you, Councillor Noonan. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? Councillor Mogg, you didn't want your right of seconder. In that case, Councillor Ferguson, do you wish to close? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 14.5, Local Planning Policy 6.17, Development in Rural Residential Zones, consideration and final adoption. Do I have a mover for that item? Councillor McCleary. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mogg. Councillor McCleary.
I'll move the motion as read.
Councillor Mogg is the seconder. Do you wish to speak? No. Is there anyone who wishes to speak on that item? In that case, Councillor McCleary, do you need to close?
Thank you, Deputy President, and thank you, Councillor Mogg. Look, I don't think there's too much to say on this. Adopting this policy and moving forward on it, I think.
I'll put that item to the vote. All those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Item 14.6, modifications to Local Planning Policy 6.3, exemptions for minor development, consideration for advertising. Do I have a mover? Councillor McCleary. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ferguson. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Deputy President. Again, I just move the motion as read.
Councillor Ferguson.
Happy to also do so, Mr. Shire President, Acting Shire President. I think the response we get from the community will be instructive if they take any interest in it. Thank you.
Is there any other councillors who wish to speak on the item? In that case, Councillor McCleary, you're happy to close? Yep, and I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 15.1, Club Night Lights Program, Ferndale Oval, Ferndale Avenue, Daylap. Do I have a mover? Councillor Mogg. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sharp. Councillor Mogg.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Chair. I move the motion as read. Thank you.
Councillor Mogg is a seconder. Councillor Sharp, sorry, is a seconder. Do you wish to speak? Is there anyone who wishes to speak on that item? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Deputy President. One of the things when reading through this item, one of the good things, one of those rare things that the Shire actually owns the land that these lights are going to be put on, my understanding, because we have the issue in other sites. But when I looked through this, and I 367,000 we're already committing to some extent, depending on the outcome of the grants, into the 25-26 draft annual budget. Now, in looking at that and depending on its revenue stream, it's 2% of budget on rate revenue. We're already indicating a long-term financial plan that we're going to have a 4% increase. We had a huge increase this year, and if we don't allocate it, then we're probably going to be in that position where we give up a grant. The total cost of this is 550k. There's some assets into that, and then we've got other processes that are happening downstream where we'll be doing lights in other areas. So it's kind of, once it's locked in, we get a carryover into other things. So in saying that, be mindful when we get round to budget setting, we could have already allocated 2% to that budget. So we've got to be really tight if we want to stick to a 4%. I would have thought we'd hope we get lower, but look, we might get a bit of growth in there of 2%. That might cover some of that. So that might change that as well. But we've got to be very mindful when we make these long-term decisions before the budget time that we're locking away an amount. And we just have that in the mindset. It's not complete yet. It depends on a grant. And we can reverse decision because we've done it before.
Thank you, Councillor McCleary. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Shire President. Look, I actually share Councillor McCleary's concern. We're actually committing ourselves in this particular motion to pulling nearly 400,000 out of the 25-26 draft budget. And I don't see anything in here that says, and I'll ask the questions now, what are we going to forego out of our long-term financial plan, or is it already in there?
Are you asking a question? Yes. So, given that, I might actually refer that to the Director of Community and Corporate, if that's all right.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Ferguson. As you will recall, the 10-year sports space strategy was endorsed with Council last month. So within the body of the report, it does talk to that the amount that's been allocated, or this particular project, is included in one of the officer's recommendations, where it looked at projects that were planned in the short term, years 1 to 5, would be included in the sports space strategy. And because it was only adopted last month, any costs included in that report is not actually currently forecast in the long-term financial plan.
Thank you, Director. Supplementary question, yes, Councillor Ferguson.
That being the case, if it was in the strategy for the recreation areas policy adopted a month ago, but we haven't included the long-term strategic plan, financial plan rather, I'm still curious as to whether we have provisioned in both documents for this particular expenditure, and if we haven't specifically provisioned for it, what other items in that particular budget will we have to forego, if any?
Would the Director like to have a go at answering that question?
Yeah, at this moment in time, I mean, based on what's currently forecast in the CBP, in the corporate business plan, this would probably be the only major project within the sports spaces plan that we would envisage coming through Council for consideration for the next financial year, given obviously the cost allocation is pretty considerable. The future, or the next iteration of the long-term financial plan, will absorb or will include all of the costs that we know to date that was identified in the sports space strategy, to give us some determination in terms of what impact that has from a long-term perspective. But at this moment in time, as I mentioned, it's not actually included in the current forecasting with the long-term financial plan, but will be included in future.
Councillor Ferguson, I'm just going to refer part of that question to the CEO.
Through you, Chair. Councillor Ferguson, it might also assist you in knowing, I guess, the timing of when we know the outcome of the application and how that can be known and considered. So the process here is local governments deal with all these applications in September. They're then submitted and started to be considered by the department in October. You would normally expect an outcome of those applications to come out in around about February or March. So we will actually know whether or not we've been successful in receiving this. Whilst the Director's action is correct, from here we would then build it into the next iteration of the long-term financial plan. However, we would actually know the outcome of the grant in early next year, and then be able to include that or not in the preparation of the draft annual budget. And if the grant's not successful, then that's a decision for Council to make into whether or not to proceed with the project in that financial year, or to resubmit an application and postpone the project.
Councillor Ferguson, you had another question. Oh, microphone. You've turned your microphone off.
I'll get it right one day. I'm concerned, and I think Councillor McCleary in his comments might have clarified it for me, but I just seek clarification that in this, if we endorse the officer's recommendation, in point 3, we're endorsing the forecast allocation of 367,000, etc. That in the event that we not successful in the grant, or we change our mind about wanting to spend that money in that particular forecast year, we can reverse that particular for the motion?
So, council will still need to consider the actual project after the determination of the grant, as what Councillor McCleary alluded to, and that has occurred where we've applied for grants previously and we've gotten to the point where we've actually rejected a project at the very last minute. So there is another opportunity for council to review this decision. What council has been asked to endorse tonight is to recognise that it's well planned and needed by the municipality for the purposes of applying for the grant, which is 1/3 of the total expenditure, and then secondly allocating that fund to the draft annual budget, which is currently not in the annual budget, in the draft annual budget, for the purpose of, if that is successful, it's been drafted into the budget. If it's not successful and council then determine that they don't want to move forward with it, they can make the decision not to move forward with it at the time. I'm being very generous with your questions as well, Councillor Ferguson. Do you have?
Extraordinary
Would you
generous,
like? Are you going to have
Mr.
another one?
I don't know if I clearly understood that even if we were successful in the grant, can we change item 3? Can we, in other words, walk away?
So, one, it has to be, the final budget needs to be approved, and if the project was to occur in this financial year, so if we were successful and the faster than expected, and the project was going to happen in this financial year, it would have to come to council for unbudgeted expenditure. So that's theory. That's potential outcome number 1. Potential outcome number 2 is that if it's successful, it still needs to come to council for tender, I believe, for that amount. So council will still need to make a decision on the actual on awarding the tender for the actual project, which is another opportunity for council to reconsider at the final cost. As you know, it can go backwards or it can go forward, so council can reconsider it then. And of course, council can consider it or reconsider the forecasted allocation when they adopt the draft budget.
Through you, Chair, if I can just add, which I think is what Councillor Ferguson is also asking, if at the end of the day we're successful in getting the grant, council decide not to proceed with the project because it doesn't want to allocate its 2/3, then we hand the grant back to the department and it goes back into the pot and can be reallocated to another local government.
Councillor Ferguson, did you have anything else to add? No? You're losing the call now, so you won't get to ask any more questions. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this item? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. Acting President. I'd like to perhaps just make the point that the officers have spent a good proportion of time and research on this motion, and I think that it's it's been well researched. And one of the things that came out that was very clear in the Sports Spaces program was the fact that Dalyalup has already reached its capacity, the current grounds. Any night when you drive back from Bunbury or from wherever into Dalyalup, you see the lights around the two schools. And there are other teams that are their training times are not ideal because of the difficulty of getting access to ovals, particularly for football, those sorts of sports. I think that the ability to provide this sort of a facility is a signal that a community has arrived, has reached a certain level, and that people can quite rightly have the expectation that these sorts of services will be provided, particularly for sporting activities, and particularly when you've got a young community, which Dalyalup is. We want to encourage kids to get out and participate in sports. If we can't provide them with the opportunity or very restricted or very minimal opportunities to actually get out and train to learn a sport, then they'll quickly lose interest. So I think that this is an important project. It's been well researched. It's part of our long-term sports spaces plan. If we don't do it now, we're going to have to do it down the track anyway, and more than likely at a larger cost as inflation takes over and so on and so forth. So I think we should, I'm very much of the mindset that we should support this this recommendation from the officers.
Thank you, Councillor Noonan. Before I ask the seconder if she would like the chance to make comment before I move it back to the mover, I think I just want to reaffirm my support for the comments made by Councillor Ferguson and Councillor McCleary. I know that we endorsed this plan last month and we did identify support for some of the short to medium term items, but it is really difficult for council to make these types of decisions when they aren't laid out in a long-term financial plan or in a 10-year capital works program. And councillors know that that's been a frustration of mine for a little while, that we haven't had that level of visibility over what the next 10 years looks like. And I'm going to become more and more reluctant with, this is not a small sum of funds either. And it's also, it's upgrading current utilities, facilities as well. There's no doubt that it's needed. It's no doubt that there is benefit to upgrading to LED floodlighting, and I'll support this item. It will go into to next year's draft budget, and Councillor McCleary makes a very good point that as the year goes on, we tick off more and more of these things to throw into the draft budget, and then we get to budget time and we wonder how did we get there. These are those moments in our times as councillors that we are getting there. So without having those projects out of that sports places plan actually strategically set out into a long-term, whether it be the long-term financial plan or capital works program, it's really hard and difficult to monitor this type of expenditure unless you're keeping this in the back of your head every time you get to draft budget and go, these are the 4 things I remember endorsing through the year and now I've had a change of heart. So I really hope that we don't make a habit of this now that sporting plan has been endorsed, and that we're getting thrown left, right and centre quite a number of these high cost projects to fulfil within the recommendations of that report. Council endorsed this report as I was there and as I did, the plan, and we just have to be mindful about how we roll that out, and that there will be a need to at times make tough decisions because there is little to none of what was in that plan in the long-term financial plan, and these things will pop up every now and then. So that's all I'd like to add to the item. Councillor Sharp, did you wish to have your chance as a seconder, or I'll give it to Councillor Mogg to close debate? Councillor Mogg, as the mover, do you have anything to add to close debate?
Thank you, Acting Deputy Chair. Thank you, Councillor Noonan. You took some of my sentiments and words that I would like to choose for closing. So again, I support what you've said in that we have a lack of sporting space. It's been acknowledged. By having these lights at the oval, it gives those sporting groups that already use that space extra time of the day for their practice time, and it adds extra other clubs interested in using the space availability. It also supports the safety issue in that area. It is very dark, and by having people at night time around doing their sporting activities with lighting, hopefully it will detract from the undesirables that get up to mischief in the playground and around the club rooms, etc. So I ask fellow councillors, please support this motion. Thank you.
I will put this item to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. The time being 7:55, I will adjourn the meeting for 10 minutes, just for bathroom breaks and things like that. We'll be back at 8:05. I don't need a procedural motion to adjourn for 10 minutes? No. All right, thank you. We'll adjourn for 10 minutes. All right, the time being 8:05 p.m, we'll come back from that 10-minute adjournment, and we are on item 15.2, unmade road closure East Boyanup. Do I have a mover for that item? Councillor McCleary, and a seconder? Councillor Ferguson. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Deputy President. I'll move the motion as read. It's simply adjusting a road reserve to fit into a new development where we'll finish up a lot more roads.
Thank you, Councillor McCleary. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Shire President. Does the council get any compensation for this, or is this land entitled to council? Is it entitled to council, and do they get any compensation as a consequence?
I'm going to refer your, well, actually it's under community and corporate, but I wonder whether or not it needs to go to infrastructure and development, but I'm getting a nod to say that we don't get any compensation. Questions through the chair, sorry, councillor. And your microphone's off. Your microphone's off.
Do we own the land?
It is a council road reserve, which is why council's been asked to close it. So I would presume we don't. So apparently we don't own the land, and so it is. I understand it is within the structure plan of that particular lot. Yep. Is there any other discussion on the item? No. In that case, Councillor Noonan. Sorry.
I suppose just, thank you, Acting President, just to make the point that by closing this road, it enables that structure plan to proceed, and which will lead to a lot more blocks being developed and residential opportunities for people in East Boyanup, and more roads and more rubbish bins and more rates and all sorts of things, opportunities for us. More lighting, that's right, more sporting.
Councillor Ferguson, we won't
more
call
sporting
across the floor.
expectations. Yeah, that's right. So, thank you.
Councillor Noonan, thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on that item? Councillor McCleary, do you wish to close?
Thank you. I think you'll find that we don't actually own road reserves. We actually own the roads in the reserves. The reserves are a state government ownership, and it's set up in the planning structures. So hence, I don't have any problem with this. It changes that, and we get more roads and more reserves anyway.
I'll put this item to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 15.3, accounts paid during the month of August 2024. Do I have a mover? Councillor McCleary. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Noonan. Councillor McCleary.
I'll move the motion as read.
Councillor Noonan.
Yes, thank you, Acting President. I'd just like to thank the director, the acting CEO, for answering all the questions that she did during the briefings that we had over the last week in relation to various different items.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this item? No. In that case, Councillor McCleary, do you wish to close?
I do, thank you, Deputy President. Look, I will note that from the checking account in August, we took out 1.8 million, so that might satisfy some of the questions that Brian asked, which reduced the amount in there. And then payroll payments were about 5. So I figured that's about 2.5 million in the month that went through. I'll put the motion to the vote.
I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 15.4, financial reports, 31st July 2024. Do I have a mover? Councillor McCleary. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ferguson. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Deputy President. Look, a lot of questions asked for Brian, and they're quite justified in their query, or Mr. Hearn. It's there's a lot of things in here, and I'm looking forward to the next month's reports with cash flows tidied up and timings of capital works. It'll be an exciting time for me.
Councillor Ferguson? No, no worries. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the financial reports? I think I'll just add, I think my main query from the briefing was just in regards to the interest revenue, which essentially was in the negative, but I think we've addressed that question, answered that question today in regards to Councillor Hearn's question and the accrual and reporting of accrual of those in that interest revenue. Yeah, I mean, myself too, I don't have any challenges so much, or I quite like the visualisation of following the projects and the variations, but I'm interested to see what the format will look like next month. Not to scare anyone, that's another 12 months away. Maybe the director would like another 12 months, but I'll be glad to see the new format and the extra level of detail that we'll have available to us in that. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? No? Councillor McCleary, do you wish to close? No, you're good. I'll put those to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. New business of an urgent nature. There is none. Public question time. Do I have any questions? Ryan's got it. Mr. Hearn. Mr. Hearn, do you mind if I take that on notice? I think it would be best if we, particularly if there is something that needs to be investigated, I think it would be best if we take that on notice, if that's okay. Thank you, but thank you for the question. There is a special item 18 if you want. Confidential item. There is a confidential item 20, but there may be an item 18, sorry. Anyway, I'll move on to item, thank you Mr. Hearn, I'll move on to item 18, motions without notice. I've received notice of a motion without notice. Now, how we will deal with this is the item has to first be voted on that it be considered on the agenda, which will require an absolute majority, which is 5. I've received notice from Councillor McCleary, has given notice that he intends to move the following motion. Request that the Shire President write to the Auditor General, presiding member of the Legislative Council Standing Committee on Estimates and Financial Operations, and Minister for Local Government to express concerns at the delay in the provision of interim audit results to the Shire of Capel, and request that the Shire receive compensation on their 2024-25 audit bill reflecting the delay in the provision of audit results. Councillor McCleary, are you moving that to be considered? Yep. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ferguson. So the motion is that the item be dealt with. I think the mover has the opportunity to speak on why the item should be dealt with without notice.
This item should be dealt with because it's delaying the outcomes of the audit report. We've already had 2 audit committee meeting shifted in time, just waiting for this report to come in.
Does the second have anything to add regarding why this is urgent? Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion that it be put on, that it be added to the agenda or be dealt with? No? The move is fine. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously with an absolute majority. So the motion can now be dealt with under 18.1, motions without notice. Councillor McCleary, you're moving that motion. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Ferguson. Councillor McCleary.
First of all, I apologise for the late notice, but we were supposed to have an audit committee meeting today, and it was delayed as a result of this information not being at hand. We were hoping staff had left it up to the last minute, and we still didn't get it in time. This was sent in by one of the audit committee members, the external one, and it's quite legitimate in its form. And I think this just sort of gives us a bit of a chance to get the wind up them to give us the results. It's just not a good outcome when it's taken, I think it's almost 3 months now, isn't it? Yeah.
Councillor Ferguson is the seconder.
Thank you to Mr Deputy Shire President. Look, I can only commend Councillor Cleary's initiative in bringing this to Council. I'm not normally one to bash the whatever current state government is, but I think this is a more than justified exercise, and we should get answers both on the timeliness and the cost. I look forward to it. I won't hold my breath.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? I think I'll just, I might just quickly add my comment. I think one of the other things that also adds to the urgency around this motion is, so there's actually currently a Legislative Council Standing Committee on estimates and financial operations that is able to bring forward an inquiry with the AOG and that's OAG, and that's essentially one of the reasons why at the moment these types of positions, affirming these types of positions as a local government is quite important, because these currently they've been brought before the Legislative Council to show cause for why there's been so many interruptions across the board, and also the challenges around the increased fees. And while the fee increase for the Shire of Capel is probably not at the higher end, some of the remote local governments are seeing huge increases, and part of the recent local government reforms was about streamlining auditing processes for local governments like those, because it recognised that there was more challenging and limited resources, while on the other hand we've got the OAG essentially, almost doubling some of the prices or costs associated with that. So it's a bit, this is a very timely manner, very supportive. As Councillor McCleary said, this has come from independent member of our audit committee. It's very well presented, very well thought through, and I think it's something council should support. I'm handing over the reins tomorrow, so if the letter's not ready by tomorrow, I'll let the Shire President sign it, but him and I will both be happy to do as what council wishes on that front. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? Councillor Noonan.
Just a question, if I could. Have we had any correspondence or information from the Auditor General as to why the delays have been occurring?
Or can I refer that question to the Director of Corporate?
Hello, thank you for your question, Councillor Noonan. No, we haven't, and obviously it's frustrating, and the current auditors who are AMD Accounting has been fantastic in this situation, and has sort of been knocking on the door every day of the OAG, asking where the report is, given obviously that they've given their comments in terms of any of the findings, and we've obviously submitted our management comment. And it should relatively be a simple process for them to review, based on that they review the management comment before it comes back into the Shire, following the interim audit process. So in that sense it's frustrating, but their AMD have been great on that score. But obviously we'll make our concerns very well known through this letter.
Thank you. Councillor Noonan, you're fine. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? Councillor McCleary is a mover. Do you wish to close? No. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. (19) Notices of motion for consideration at the next ordinary meeting of council. Is there any? No. Item 20, items for consideration behind closed doors. So I will move that this meeting be closed to members of the public in accordance with the Shire of Capel Standing Orders and Local Law 2016 12.1G to considering the following confidential item, the Day-Up Library lease. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Noonan. There's no discussion on that. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Just give the team a moment to with council having returned from behind closed doors, I can say that item 20.1, Day-Up Library lease, was lost unanimously. Time being 8:24, I will declare this September Ordinary Council meeting closed. Thank you, everyone.